First Sergeant Cap here with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. And in our previous video, we covered an introduction to sewing for reenactors. And in today's video, I wanted to do a beginning sewing project to use some of those skills that we covered. And that is how to make poke sacks. If you're unfamiliar with a poke sack, it's just a small handmade bag to store all your odds and ends. You can use these from storing any sort of like modern things that you may need to conceal, or organizing your rations and dividing up your kits for better organization. This one is out of my mess kit, and I have various things like soap and cooking oil, seasoning, all sorts of things that I would like to have on me to make my food taste a little bit better and to aid me in the cooking process. So this is one of those kits. And then in this poke sack, this is just my fire kit. So I mostly have tinder and chunks of fat wood to help me get a cooking fire started. How big you make your poke sack is going to be entirely up to what your individual needs are. You can have small ones and big ones and medium-sized ones. Just kind of figure out what you want to put into it before you start sewing it. Now, the material that you use is also up to you. It should be period appropriate and naturally, and contain natural materials, so like, no polyesters. So this one is just a scrap from my wife's quilting, and she gets her quilting fabric from, I believe it's reproductionfabrics.com. And you have a choice of choosing your time period for the proper type of print. And you can also make these any number of ways. So as long as the finished product securely holds what you want to keep in it, chalk it up to a win. This is just a really basic way that I make a poke sack really quickly, and so I can put it into use. You can get as elaborate as you want with making your poke sack. So I just have a scrap of fabric right here. You'll need your housewife, so you can have your sewing implements ready to go. And I'll be using just my original Civil War needle and some linen thread that I need to wax. So I got my little wax. I'll tie a knot on the end of my string. And that is ready to go. Now, for construction, there's going to be a lot of flexibility, but what I prefer is to make it nice and quick. I'll just use one piece of fabric and I'll fold it. You can do two pieces if that's all you have for whatever reason, but if you make a poke sack on the fold, it cuts your sewing down considerably because you don't have to finish the seam. And this will make it a lot easier in your planning as far as making sure that you can run your cord, your cinch string, through the top. And again, you'll want to use a cord that is period appropriate. I have some hemp cord here, and however much you think you'll need for your poke sack. So the whole idea is that you need to have a channel for the drawstring where the string can pass through uninterrupted. So that's one of the key elements of making drawstring bags. Now, if you just stitched this, like say this was two pieces, and if you just stitched it closed, this would be blocked and you couldn't get the string through it. So by having just one piece that you fold in half, that keeps this hem up here that we're going to sew in free flowing for the string. And for simplicity, I like a good side draw on my poke sacks. So the string will come out of the side of the sack. You can have them come out the front or any which way. You'll just have to factor that into your design choices. So now what I like to do, but you don't have to do, I like to have a finished edge on the top of my poke sack. So that way I don't have a bunch of fraying poking up through my poke sack as it gets well used. So what I'll do, and what I've done here, since I'm working in cotton, I just fold it over, about, say, what, 1/4 inch of a hem right here. And you can iron it, depending on your material, you may need to. And I just creased it with my finger. This isn't fancy garment construction. You just want it to look nice enough to meet your standards and make sure that it works functionally. So now, this is going to give us a nice finished edge, but we have to fold it over one more time. And how far we fold it over is going to be based on how big our cordage is going to be. So I'm just using this nice small piece of cordage. So this doesn't have to be all that big to make sure that it could move freely. So, I don't know. I'd say that looks probably plenty big enough. So I'll pull that out. And again, I don't spend a lot of time fussing about these. So again, you can measure this perfectly with a ruler, make your marks, press everything. There we go. So this way, our hem, we have the right side showing. This is the wrong side of the material, so this is going to be the inside of the poke sack. And now we need to secure this so it doesn't move. And we are going to use our felling stitch. So you can also just do a running stitch along this edge if you want. It's fine. You're just kind of securing the hem, so don't stress it too much. Just you need to make sure that it stays in place. So what I'm going to do is just work on our video sewing skills and work on this felling stitch. So again, just like in our previous video, tiny little nibble on the bottom. And then hit the corner. And then you do that all the way up. And then knot off when you're done. And then we're ready for the next step. Now that we have our felling stitch in place, our hem will be secure. And now it's time to sew the sack together. So we've been working on the wrong side. And when you sew a bag, you typically want to sew the right sides together. So the nice side, you're going to fold it in half. So that way we still see the wrong side of the poke sack. And then again, I'm just going to use my hands to crease everything. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and I typically don't pin my work, but if you're new to sewing, I highly recommend that you pin. So, to set a good example, and pinning just makes sure that your work doesn't move around on you anywhere that you don't want it to. And then, two, kind of how many pins you use is going to be determined on what you need and the material that you're working with. Oh, these are some old pins. One's rusted into my housewife. Just make sure everything's nice and flat and all your edges are equal as you pin. And I always try to make sure that my finished parts up here meet perfectly. Gives it a nice professional finish. Even if the rest of the inside of your bag that no one sees doesn't look great, at least what people do see will be your best work. So there we go. I got it pinned into place, so we can get one more out of here. And right there. Okay. So now you're going to need to rethread your needle, wax it, and tie a knot on the end. Where you start from is personal preference. I personally don't think it matters that much. But I'm going to start from the bottom. And we need to figure out, where do we want our stitch line? So I'm just going to go kind of close to the edge here, because a lot of historical sewing calls for really small seam allowances. So there was minimal wasted fabric. And then what I'm going to do for the rest of this bag is I'm going to use a back stitch. So I got started, and then I'm going to go back to the previous hole. This is always really tricky on camera. There we go. Just like that. And then again, we take our needle and go far enough ahead of where we're sewing to factor in our stitch length. Come up from the bottom and back to the previous stitch. And this will give you a really nice, strong, durable stitch. This is all sorts of tangly when you're doing it for the YouTubes. There we go. This is actually a piece of cake when you're just stitching in the comfort of your home or on the bivouac. So let's do one more together. So go ahead, factor in your stitch length, pull it through, and go back. And then you will do this all around the edge, and then you'll finish up here. And go ahead and I highly recommend at least a good double knot right here, since this part of the bag is going to be under a lot of strain over its lifetime. And then we'll be ready for our next step. Once you are done with all of your stitching, we're ready to turn the sack inside out. For the spot that I ended on, I actually sewed back the width of the hem for a little bit of extra strength before knotting off. If you want really sharp corners on your poke sacks, you can go ahead and trim off the corners, and this will remove the bulk and give you a nice corner when you're finished. So now we just need to turn it inside out. And then use a blunt object of some sort to turn your corners to where you like them. And there we go. Now we need to insert the drawstring. There's quite a few different ways you can do this based on what's available to you. So I like to do these on the side that I sewn. So we need to have a string and a hole on each side of the seam for it to go in and come out of. So for threading, you can use one of these drawstring threaders that you can get at the Notions section of any sewing or craft store. These are really handy. I get a lot of use out of them, and they're really affordable. If you don't have one of those, you could tie your string on to a safety pin, or tape your cordage to any sort of blunt, rigid object that could serve the same purpose. So you just kind of figure out where you want your string to come out of, and you poke your scissors in. I usually try to get it as centered onto my seam as I can. And you don't cut all the way through. You're just trying to cut through this top layer of fabric, and then try to make it equal on the other side. Now, if you're making like a big bag, or you're using like a large piece of cordage, you could even buttonhole stitch these holes. But these are pretty much just for utility, so they don't have to be sewn super nice. But you can, and I have done it a time or two in the past because I was using a large cordage, or maybe I was trying to deliberately be fancy. So I'm going to use a sailing needle to thread my cordage. So now that I have my hole, I'm going to thread it in. Be careful not to poke yourself or poke through. And then as your needle goes in, you just pull thread behind you. See how I'm bunching up? Now I'm going to pull the thread in, or the cordage in, and then okay, pull more in, and just keep going. Almost there. If you plan on making a lot of these, one of these drawstring threaders is practically priceless. So now I'm back through, pull out my thread, pull my needle, and just be careful you don't pull all the way through. Take my needle off. And then for slack, it's just kind of personal preference. And you trim it off. And you could do this a couple of different ways. Sometimes I'll tie both of these together so they can't go back through, or you can tie some large knots on the end of each one. And then give it the old test. You have your first poke sack. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope it's been a good opportunity for you to develop your hand sewing skills, and that this serves you lots of use in the hobby. Thanks as always for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll see you next time.